government tries to infringe on the Second Amendment, proceeds to get sued by everybody. This is great work. We are the Armed Attorneys. Today, we're talking about a whole mess of gun control that dropped on January the 1st, 2024, and how there's already lawsuits to stop this stuff from going into effect. But before we begin, share your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And know Emily today. She's under the gun working on an important brief for a client. And so everybody send her good vibes. But we're talking about a huge, collection of gun control that went into effect in Colorado on January the 1st, 2024. And this is, I think, important, and we can all learn a lot from it. You don't just have to be a resident of the state of Colorado, because it kind of shows a peek into the gun grabbers playbook and how I think they're going to implement these things or attempt to implement these things in other states. And so we're talking about Senate Bill 23279. Now, let's talk first about what this bill does. We're going to go into some really key definitions here, and this is where I think the sneak peek is in the playbook. And then a tremendous lawsuit that just dropped to stop any of this stuff from going into effect. So let's start first with this kind of bill and the kind of key components of what it does. It does a whole lot of things, but let's highlight the big stuff. It prohibits knowingly possessing or transporting an unfinished firearm frame or receiver unless it's been imprinted with a serial number as required by federal law. So we do have a federal law that talks about not having obliterated serial numbers. I think that's what they're talking about there. They criminalize knowingly selling or offering to sell, transferring, or purchasing unfinished firearms, frames, or receivers unless it has been imprinted with a serial number as required by federal law. Now, I don't really know what they're going at here. We have the Vanderstock case, but we have that ghost gun rule, and that's their term. That's not our term. If you're listening to this, don't worry. I'm making the hand quotes. But what they're talking about is, frames and receivers, those are required to be imprinted with a serial number. Those are considered firearms under federal law. Now, where things get a little bit hairy is, well, when we have these things that are unfinished frames or receivers, the federal government, are they calling those things firearms? Is the state of Colorado going to be considering those things firearms? And therefore, would it need to be imprinted with a serial number? That's kind of what makes this thing a gigantic mess. It also criminalizes knowingly possessing, purchasing, transporting, or receiving a frame or receiver that has not been imprinted with a serial number. So let's say you go to Home Depot and buy a block of metal. Would that be criminal? God only knows. Knowingly selling, offering to sell, or transferring a firearm frame or receiver of a firearm that is not imprinted with a serial number. So that would go after our non-licensed. Let's say you have these firearms kits or blocks of metal. If you were to sell these things, criminalizing that stuff. And then manufacturing or cause to be manufactured a frame or receiver of a firearm unless the manufacturer is a federally firearms licensed dealer. Now, that is the big one that I'm going to repeat because I think that's a little bit unprecedented. It's basically saying it's a ban on homemade guns unless you are a federal firearms licensed dealer. Now, that's a whole lot of gun control all going into effect January the 1st. Again, that was Bill 23279. Now, the act itself has some interesting definitions in it, and they vary slightly from things that we've seen across the United States, and I think that's worth highlighting. There's really two definitions that I really want to talk about. The first one is the frame or receiver of a firearm. Now, we have definitions in the United States Code. We have definitions in the Code of Federal Regulations defining those things, making it really clear. This one is a little bit more ambiguous, and I think it creates a lot of problems and unintended consequences. So let's read this definition. Frame or receiver of a firearm means a part of a firearm that, when the complete firearm is assembled, is visible from the exterior and provides a housing or a structure designed to hold or integrate one or more fire control components, even if the pins or other attachments are required to connect to the fire control components. Any other part of a firearm imprinted with a serial number is presumed to be a frame or receiver of a firearm unless the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, they put an errand comma there, makes an official determination or otherwise that there is other reliable evidence to the contrary. So what we see there is they're saying anything that's visible from the exterior that houses parts, we're going to call that a frame or receiver. Now, that might be a more expansive definition than we have seen previously because there's lots of parts on a gun that aren't considered the frame or receiver that theoretically could house other components. And so I think that's worth pointing out. So when they're talking about what is a frame or receiver, that's what they're talking about. So they say these, hey, we're going to prohibit the unlawful possession of a, unserialized frame or receiver, and then they have this crazy expansive definition. That's where it starts getting really, really wild. Here's the other definition I really wanted to point out: what they consider an unfinished frame or receiver. An unfinished frame or receiver means any forging, casting, printing, extrusion, machine body, or similar article that has reached a stage in manufacture where it may be readily completed, assembled, or converted to be used as the frame or receiver of a functional firearm, or that is marketed or sold to the public to become or used as the frame or receiver of a functional firearm once completed, assembled, or converted. So it's two things there. It's and this is the tricky part here. They say that may be readily completed. Again, not defined. What the heck does that mean? But they even go so far as to say is if you market this thing as, hey, this is a parts kit or an unfinished frame or receiver that you can make, you could complete at your house, we're going to consider that an unfinished frame or receiver. And so maybe even things that might be suitable to be a frame or receiver, but isn't what we would traditionally think as a parts kit. If it's kind of known to be used for that purpose, they're going to say that thing is illegal as well. So you can see this is a lot of new crimes, expansive, crazy new definitions. We got to talk about the lawsuit now. This is some incredible work from the National Association for Gun Rights. We have some individual plaintiffs here: Christopher Richardson, Max Slosser, John Howard, and the Rocky Mountain gun owners. Now, this is one of those things that, we mentioned this on a previous video where it's like guy tries to rob store and proceeds to get, shot by everyone. This is, you know, government tries to infringe on the Second Amendment, proceeds to get sued by everybody. This is great work. And they point out, all of the issues that I think we all kind of inherently believe are wrong with this. And this reminds me of the Vandershark case where we have, Judge Reed O'Connor vacating nationwide the frames and receivers rule that the ATF monkeyed around with and didn't follow the correct rulemaking process. And so I think there's a lot of arguments that we all inherently have against the implementation of this law. No joke, especially in light of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin. There's no text, history, or tradition of a lot of these different things, but chiefly here, requiring a license to build or manufacture your own firearm for personal use. This is something that we haven't seen before. And so that's something that I think we need to be on the lookout for in the gun grabbers playbook, because they want to make the firearm ownership as difficult as possible. They want to make as many hoops as possible. They want administrative confusion. When I talk to folks who, call me or talk to me and they're so discouraged about the gun laws and, why do they keep passing these things knowing that they're unconstitutional? Well, they love the administrative confusion. This is not, they don't see it as, oh, look, we're losing all these gunfights everywhere. We see people are left completely stupefied about what's legal and what's not legal. And it just creates this chilling effect where people don't want to engage in, their Second Amendment rights, keeping and bearing arms, defending themselves. And it undermines self-defense, which is the core principle of the Second Amendment. Now, we have our New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. That's going to be kind of our big guiding principle here, looking at the text of this bill. And do we have any historical tradition, based on the Second Amendment? Is the Second Amendment implicated? Absolutely. Do we have any, based on how the Second Amendment was treated at the time of the adoption in 1791, is this something that they would have been allowed to regulate as we understand that word today? And the answer is no. I mean, we have some pretty good evidence in this complaint that lays it out. There wasn't any regulation of federal firearms manufacturing, for individual personal use if you wanted to make a homemade gun in the 17th, 18th, and even 19th centuries. And so, absent there being laws passed at the time of the adoption of the Second Amendment, the government's going to have a real hard time overcoming that burden to show, hey, yes, this is something that is legitimately regulated, as we understand that word today. They're going to have a really uphill battle at this. Now, what is the path forward? Well, they're going to ask for basically a temporary restraining order. There's kind of three steps to this. First, they're going to say, hey, district court, and let me give you this case number in case you want to start following this case. It's case 1:24-CV-00001-STV. So it was the first case filed in the United States District Court in Colorado. I mean, that's also pretty impressive. But if you want to follow that case along, that's where you can find it. But they're going to start with, we have this kind of three-step process they want to go through. First, they're going to ask for a temporary restraining order. That's where they say, Judge, I know you don't know anything about this case, but we need you to hit pause while we brief this matter for you so that you can get up to speed on it and decide whether or not this law should go into effect. So we'll see something on that front very soon. The next step and what they're going to be asking for is a permanent injunction. But before we get there, we will see, will the court issue a preliminary injunction? That's where the court goes through this kind of four-step test. Are the plaintiffs likely to succeed on the merits? Is this a unconstitutional infringement on the Second Amendment? And are they likely to succeed on the merits of their complaint here? And the answer is probably yes. So that's the next thing that we're going to be looking for. So that restraining order, preliminary injunction. Ultimately, they're going to be looking for a final injunction, barring the state of Colorado from enforcing this law. Why is this good? Well, I think this is one of the most clear cut because I really think they really overplayed their hand here, the state of Colorado. And we have about 5 or 6 other states that have some ghost gun restrictions, that have restrictions on homemade firearms, that have restrictions on serializing firearms on unfinished frames and receivers. And so once we have these kind of issues making their way through the courts, if we have one court, I expect the DC circuit and the DC courts to uphold all of their restrictions. This might be the opportunity where we see a different circuit outside of our traditional, Ninth and Northeast circuits. This might be one of those circuits where we start to see a split. Let's keep our eye on it. We're going to be monitoring it for you. So if there are any further developments, we'll absolutely give you a breakdown. But we just want to bring this case to your attention, let you know there's some things that happen into it. But we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video. And leave us your questions in the comment section down below. Send Emily your well wishes. And until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.